Welcome to the deep dive. I'm thrilled you're here with us today because the mission today is to explore excerpts from what is basically an absolute monument of classical literature.
Yeah, monument is definitely the right word for it.
Right. We are looking at Murasaki Shikibu's 11th century masterpiece, The Tale of Genji. And specifically, we're diving into the Hahakigi, or the broom tree chapter, using the modern Japanese translation by Akiko Yosano.
Which is such a brilliant section to look at.
It really is. And you know, when you hear the name Shining Genji, you probably picture history's ultimate playboy, like a figure of just total unrestrained abandon. But the text actually shatters that myth on page 1.
It does. It completely upends it. The source text explicitly establishes that the reality of his character was quite different. Genji is described as prudent and really quite serious.
Yeah.
He actively disliked the whole frivolous, reckless lifestyle that popular culture always attributes to him.
Exactly. I mean, he kept his private correspondence and his romances incredibly quiet. And it wasn't because he was hiding this sprawling network of affairs.
Right. It was because he was profoundly aware of how gossipy and scrutinizing his society was. He even avoided the estate of his powerful father-in-law.
He'd rather just hang out with a close friend.
Yeah, preferring the quiet company of a close friend for reading and studying over having to perform for the social elite all the time.
So by stripping away that playboy myth immediately, Murasaki Shikibu is signaling to the reader, and really to you listening right now, that this is not your typical sweeping, predictable romance.
At all.
She is setting up this highly analytical, often really critical breakdown of human behavior, rigid class expectations, and just the fundamentally impossible standards of courtship.
It's basically a psychological map of the imperial court, written a millennium ago, but dealing with social anxieties that feel, honestly, remarkably modern.
Which brings us to one of the most heavily analyzed scenes in world literature. It
It's-
functions as this brilliant framing device to expose those exact social anxieties.
Oh, the rainy night discussion.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the psychology of this text, we have to look closely at this famous scene, the Amayo no Shinasadam.
Such a great scene.
So it's a rainy May evening. The men are confined to the palace under a mandatory period of fasting and purification. Basically, they're locked down.
Yeah, unable to return home or receive any visitors.
Right. So Genji and his close friend, the head chamberlain, who also happens to be his brother-in-law, Tano Chujo, they're passing the time by sorting through this private collection of Genji's letters from various women.
And in this liminal, restricted space, the simple act of examining colored paper and calligraphy just naturally transitions into this impromptu sociological seminar.
Totally.
Tano Chujo begins theorizing about women in a broader sense, and he imposes a very strict hierarchical classification system. He divides them into the upper, middle, and lower classes.
But he isn't just looking at their aristocratic rank, is he?
No, not just rank. He is analyzing how their environment and their upbringing fundamentally shape their actual character.
And his conclusion regarding these social tiers is deeply revealing, because Tano Chujo argues that upper-class women, like the highest aristocrats, they're just too sheltered.
Way too sheltered.
They are cloistered behind screens, heavily pampered, and their personal flaws are deliberately obscured by all their wealth and the attendants surrounding them. You literally never really know who you are marrying until it is too late.
Exactly. And conversely, he completely dismisses the lower-class women as lacking the refinement to even merit discussion.
Right.
But the middle class, the daughters of provincial governors and mid-level officials, this is where Tano Chujo claims you find genuine, fascinating individuality.
What's fascinating here is how these aristocratic men are essentially executing an early form of sociological profiling.
Yeah, they really are.
In their assessment, these middle-class women occupy this very specific privilege threshold.
Right. They possess enough familial resources to be highly educated and cultured.
But they lack the extreme elite status that would shield them completely from the harsh realities of the world?
Precisely. These men are searching for an authentic personality beneath the heavy lacquer of societal conditioning. They want a partner equipped to navigate the actual complexities of life, rather than just a living doll hidden away in a palace pavilion.
And that desire for the perfect balance leads right into this extensive debate, introducing what we might call the Goldilocks standard of 11th century courtship.
Ooh, the Goldilocks standard. I like that.
Because two other courtiers join the room, the captain of the left horses, Sama no Kami, and a scholar named Shikibu no Jo. And Sama no Kami just launches into this sweeping philosophical rant about the near impossibility of finding an adequate wife.
You have quite the checklist.
A staggering list of requirements. She must be a flawless manager of his domestic estate. However, if she is only domestic, that is insufficient.
Of course it is.
She must also be intellectually sharp and cultured enough to understand his public life and his political struggles. If she lacks that intellect, he argues, a man is condemned to an incredibly isolating marriage.
Forced to laugh at jokes or fume over office politics entirely in his own head.
He is articulating a profound fear of intellectual loneliness.
He really is. He recognizes that marriage requires a true confidant, not merely an estate manager. Yet, as he begins to detail his own romantic history to the group, it becomes abundantly clear that his attempts to find this perfect equilibrium only expose his own deep insecurities.
Oh, absolutely. We see that insecurity play out viscerally in the cautionary tales he shares. His first story centers on a woman who seemed to embody the domestic ideal. She managed his home perfectly, she was intensely devoted, and she took great care in her appearance exclusively for his benefit.
But there was a catch.
A huge catch. Her tragic flaw in his eyes was her fierce, unyielding jealousy. So to cure her of this intense focus on him, he devises this manipulative test. He intentionally acts cold and threatens to sever their relationship entirely, assuming she will just be frightened into submissive silence.
Right, he expects her to just back down.
But instead, she sees through the cruelty, flies into a rage, grabs his hand, and violently bites his finger.
Which is wild, because in an aristocratic culture governed by extreme politeness, poetry, and restraint, a physical bite is a shocking rupture of protocol.
It's unheard of.
She refuses to play his psychological game and literally physically marks him for his cruelty.
Yeah.
But rather than examine his own manipulative behavior, he uses the bite as an excuse to punish her further.
Yeah, he storms out claiming he cannot possibly appear at court with a wounded finger. He stays away for days, fully intending to teach her a lesson in obedience.
The arrogance.
I know. Eventually, on this freezing, sleeting night after a winter festival, he returns, assuming she has been sufficiently humbled. He enters the house to find her completely gone.
Wow.
She has returned to her father's estate, but before she departed, she left behind perfectly tailored, beautifully prepared winter robes for him, laid out carefully over a warming basket.
That is such a cinematic detail.
It is. He realizes his catastrophic error way too late, and he informs the other men that she eventually died of a broken heart.
And by leaving those meticulously prepared garments, she performs this devastating final act. She demonstrates her flawless domestic capability while simultaneously and permanently revoking his access to it.
Right.
It is a tragedy entirely born of his inability to handle her devotion. He demanded a perfectly attentive wife, but when her attention manifested as jealousy, he tried to control her through emotional abuse, and it just destroyed them both.
So having completely failed with the domestic ideal, Sama no Kami pivots to his second story. And he contrasts the jealous wife with another lover he maintained at the same exact time.
Because of course he did.
Right. This woman was the epitome of courtly, artistic grace, musically gifted, wrote exquisite poetry, possessed all the refined elegance the upper class demanded, yet he severed the relationship with her as well.
And the breaking point for this one is so telling.
It happens on this beautiful November evening. He's walking past her residence and notices a courtier sitting on her veranda playing the flute in the moonlight. And from inside the house, the woman was playing the 13-string koto, exchanging flirtatious, poetic banter with the visitor.
This perfectly highlights the contradictory demands these men place on women. Sama no Kami requires a wife who is highly cultured and artistically proficient. But the very moment she exhibits that culture to anyone else, he views her as performative and untrustworthy.
Yeah, he wants her artistic brilliance to exist solely for his private consumption.
Exactly. The jealous wife was too focused on him, but the artistic wife was too open to the world. He wants it both ways.
And the room just continues to exchange these stories, building up this massive catalog of female archetypes to avoid. To No Chujo chimes in and shares the story of a lover he referred to as his wild carnation.
The passive one.
Right, she represented the exact opposite of the jealous wife, entirely passive, never raised her voice, never issued a complaint, never demanded his time. And because she failed to set any boundaries, to No Chujo admits he just casually neglected her.
Until she was gone.
Yep. One day, without warning, she simply vanished, leaving him with a lingering sense of regret.
Her disappearance really speaks to the anxiety of an unreadable partner. A woman who demands nothing, provides no friction, but she also provides no anchor. Without her asserting her own existence, the relationship simply dissolved into the background of his life.
Which brings us to the final story of the seminar. Shikibu no Jo, the scholar, provides a story that introduces the tension between intellect and romance. He describes a woman who is the daughter of his professor. Brilliant, highly educated, capable of writing complex letters in formal Chinese characters.
A very smart woman.
Extremely. So one day, he attempts to visit her. But instead of the typical coy evasion you'd expect from a courtly lover, she refuses to see him for purely practical reasons.
I love this part.
She shouts at him through a screen in a booming voice, explaining that she has ingested a severely hot medicinal garlic treatment for an illness, and therefore she smells too terrible to entertain a guest.
This raises such an important question about the era's view of female intellect. The scholar presents her hyperpracticality as a flaw that destroys the romantic mystique.
Right, the garlic ruins the vibe.
Completely. She prioritizes her physical health and speaks with unvarnished, unpoetic truth. I smell like garlic, do not come in. To these men, she's entirely too practical to be a romantic ideal.
So when you synthesize these four distinct narratives, you see the construction of this impossible Goldilocks standard. They're demanding a partner who is not too jealous, yet not too passive.
Highly intelligent, but not overly academic.
Charming and cultured, but entirely devoid of flirtation. They're sitting in a locked room, actively trying to construct a flawless theoretical ideal out of deeply complex, flawed human beings.
And that theoretical discussion is immediately put to the test. Murasaki Shikibu does not let these theories just linger in a vacuum. She forces Genji out of the palace and into the real world to confront the very middle-class demographic they just spent the entire night romanticizing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Genji is forced to leave the palace due to a directional taboo, or karatagai.
Right, the astrological constraint.
Exactly. It wasn't merely a passing superstition, but a serious astrological and cosmological constraint dictated by court diviners. If a deity was positioned in a certain direction on a given day, traveling or sleeping in that direction was strictly forbidden.
You couldn't just ignore it.
No, to comply with this, courtiers had to seek temporary lodging elsewhere. So Genji ends up at the private estate of the governor of Ki.
And the physical setting of this estate is crucial to what happens next. The text deliberately emphasizes the architecture and the landscaping. It features a brushwood fence, a shibagaki, and a distinctly rustic country-style garden.
It's very intentional.
Highly intentional. This is the architectural embodiment of the middle-class taste. To no Chujo is just praising. It is unpretentious, authentic, and stands in stark contrast to the oppressive, sterile perfection of the imperial palace walls.
And it is within this deliberately grounded setting that Genji discovers another guest is staying at the estate, the young wife of the elderly deputy governor of Iyo. She is the sister of his host, and she perfectly matches the profile of the highly capable provincial middle-class woman the men were just analyzing.
His exact demographic.
Exact one. So Genji's curiosity is immediately sparked. Utilizing the cover of darkness, he actually sneaks along the veranda and eavesdrops on the woman and her ladies-in-waiting as they gossip about his public reputation.
That moment of eavesdropping subtly humanizes the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
Genji is a prince of the blood. He's the shining superstar of the capital. These provincial women are speaking about him as a distant celebrity.
Right, like he's on a magazine cover.
Exactly. They are completely unaware that he is standing just inches away on the other side of the sliding doors.
So later that night, Genji decides to infiltrate her quarters. Guided in the dark by the overwhelming scent of his own incense-perfumed clothing, he slips into her room. He bypasses her attendants, finds her sleeping, and utilizes the sheer physical advantage of his position to lift her up and carry her away into his own temporary room.
Just locks her lady-in-waiting out in the process.
Completely shuts her out.
It is an intrusion that relies entirely on the immense weight of his social power. Genji operates under the assumption that because he is the shining Genji, this provincial, middle-class wife will be so overwhelmed by his status and his sheer beauty that she will be flattered into absolute compliance.
He assumes she'll just go along with it.
Right. He expects the narrative to follow the standard courtly romantic script.
But the script is completely upended here. This is the critical turning point of the chapter. When the woman wakes up and realizes what is happening, she does not swoon. She does not scream or create a panicked scene that would alert the house. Instead, she firmly, coldly, and rationally rejects him. She establishes an immediate boundary, citing the insurmountable disparity in their social standings. She tells him, "Our classes are far apart and separate.
Wow.
She explicitly reminds him of her status as a married woman, and she categorically refuses to be reduced to a temporary plaything for a bored aristocrat passing through.
Her rejection is an absolute masterclass in realistic self-preservation. She possesses the exact grounded intellect that Tuno Chujo theorized the middle class held. She understands precisely how this dynamic plays out in the real world.
For Genji, she would just be a fleeting secret amusement.
Exactly. But for her, yielding would mean the total destruction of her reputation and her life within her own societal tier. She points out that if he had approached her before she was married, perhaps it would be a different conversation.
But that's not the reality.
Right. Under the current reality, it is impossible. She utterly refuses to participate in his romantic fantasy because she alone will bear the real-world consequences.
And Genji is completely unaccustomed to being denied. He argues with her. He leverages all the classic poetic tropes of destiny and fateful encounters. I mean, he even sheds tears.
Pulls out all the stops.
But her cold, practical demeanor remains entirely unbroken. When dawn breaks, she returns to her own room, leaving Genji thoroughly frustrated. However, her unwavering resistance achieves something unexpected. It makes him completely obsessed with her.
Well, she has disrupted his reality. She's the first woman who hasn't folded to his charm or his princely rank. She embodies the precise, immovable individuality that the men in the palace were searching for.
Yeah.
But Genji quickly realizes that possessing that individuality means encountering a will as strong as his own.
And since he's unable to let it go, Genji resorts to manipulation. He identifies a vulnerability. The woman has a younger brother named Kogimi. Genji brings the boy into his inner circle at the palace. He showers the child with extravagant clothes, gifts, and unprecedented attention, effectively recruiting the boy to serve as his secret messenger.
It's so calculating.
It is. Genji even goes so far as to lie to Kogimi, falsely claiming that he was secretly the boy's sister's lover long before she was married off to the elderly governor.
It is a deeply manipulative tactic. Genji is leveraging his overwhelming wealth and influence over a child to bypass the firm boundaries the woman established. He is attempting to isolate her, demonstrating that his power can infiltrate her own family and basically rewrite her personal history in the eyes of her brother.
And this manipulation builds to a final, orchestrated attempt to corner her. Using Kogimi to arrange the logistics, Genji plans another secret visit to the estate. He genuinely believes he has outmaneuvered her. But the woman's practical intellect shines through once again. She anticipates his arrival.
She sees him coming from a mile away.
She really does. Before Genji can even approach her private quarters, she quietly relocates. She surrounds herself with her ladies-in-waiting in a distant room and feigns a sudden illness, having her attendants massage her back. By embedding herself in a crowd and claiming physical ailment, she makes a secret romantic approach entirely impossible.
She weaponizes the strict social rules of propriety and illness to forge an impenetrable shield. Genji cannot force his way through a room full of attendants without causing a massive public scandal.
Which is the one thing he actively avoids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She outmaneuvers the prince by simply adhering strictly to the rules of her society.
So the great shining Genji is left so deeply frustrated by this tactical deceit that he ends up spending the night sleeping next to the little brother Kogimi instead. He is forced to accept that he has been definitively shut down.
Definitively.
And this profound rejection brings us to the core metaphor that gives the chapter its title, the broom tree, or Hahakigi. In the aftermath, Genji sends her a poem comparing her to this legendary tree, complaining that she offered a lush, inviting appearance from a distance, only to cruelly vanish when he tried to approach her.
But her poetic reply flips the entire metaphor back onto him.
She does.
She responds through her brother, using the imagery of a fusia, a humble, lowly hut. She informs Genji that, exactly like the broom tree, she simply does not exist for him. If we connect this to the bigger picture, her use of the broom tree metaphor is a profound assertion of her own autonomy.
It really is.
Her firm boundaries and her unclouded, realistic view of her own social fate protect her from the destructive passions of a higher-class man. She forces the shining Genji to respect the boundaries of her reality over the entitlement of his romantic fantasy.
She is basically declaring, I am not an illusion for you to chase. I am a real person, and I am stepping completely out of your narrative.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean? We began this deep dive in a locked palace room, listening to aristocratic men theorize, grade, and categorize women as if they were abstract concepts to be collected. They demanded an impossible, contradictory ideal.
The Goldilocks standard.
Exactly. We then followed the ultimate romantic hero out into the provinces, only to watch him get firmly and logically dismantled by a practical, middle-class woman who flatly refused to be categorized or consumed. Murasaki Shikibu took the glossy tropes of courtly romance and aggressively grounded them in cold, hard reality.
And she leaves us with a framework that transcends the 11th century. Consider the men's intense categorization of women during that rainy night. The meticulous lists of flaws, the profound fear of intellectual isolation, the impossible standards.
Yeah.
If we strip away the aristocratic titles, the silk robes, and the koto music, and we place those exact same men in a modern coffee shop today, how much of their perfect partner criteria is actually about the pursuit of love? And how much is simply the eternal human condition of projecting our own deep-seated insecurities onto someone else?
That is a fascinating thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the narrative and keep learning. We'll catch you on the next one.